Hello and welcome to the Whole Life Election Special. I'm Grace Fielding.
And I'm Paul Woolley, and today we're talking about the Labour Party. Hello and welcome back. The election has been called, and we will soon know if Rishi Sunak will return to number 10 or whether Keir Starmer will enter Downing Street, becoming the first Labour leader to win an election since Tony Blair back in 2005. In all the noise of the election campaign, it can be difficult to cut through to the substance of what really matters in terms of the political vision and policies of the parties. And this podcast seeks to put that right. How does the Christian story connect with the different ideologies of our political parties? And how can it shape the way that we vote?
Yes, that's right. It was former General Secretary of the Labour Party, Morgan Phillips, who said, Labour owed more to Methodism than to Marxism. So, what's the link between the Christian story and the Labour Party? And to what extent does the current vision and the policies of the Labour Party align with it? Well, I'm delighted that we're joined by Labour politician Cat Smith today. Cat was elected as MP for Lancaster and Fleetwood in 2015. She was a member of the shadow cabinets of Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer from 2016 to 2021 as Shadow Secretary of State for Young People and Democracy. She's one of Labour's faith champions, and writing on the Parliament website, Cat writes, "Born to a Methodist mother, I was raised attending Sunday school in my local church. I feel blessed to have been brought up in my Christian faith, and it's been an anchor throughout my life." Well, Kat, hello, welcome to the Whole Life podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Grace and Paul.
It's great to see you.
It's really great to have you with us, Kat. And we'll get in rightfully to the politics shortly, but perhaps we could begin with a bit of your own faith journey. You say that faith has been an anchor throughout your whole life. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about how this has come to be.
I do feel very fortunate that I was raised in a family that was a Christian family, a church attending family, and a family where our faith in Jesus Christ was a real cornerstone to quite a lot of my early childhood experiences, and that has always been a huge comfort to me. But it was probably around in my teens when I think, like for many people that are raised Christian, there is a moment of realization that this is a living faith and that this is a faith that will be the anchor through my life, but will also direct my life and steer my life. And I can remember being involved in the Methodist Youth Fellowship in Barrow-in-Furness and having those friendships and fellowships with other young people, other young Christians, and being involved in some of the national Methodist youth work that really brought my faith into. I realised really that my faith was the most important thing in my life. And I suppose everything kind of has flowed from that. That's not to say that it's always been plain sailing. Like many Christians, there have been moments of quite dark despair where, you know, I think it's probably quite normal that there have been moments of questioning and doubt. And that's perhaps an indication of the flaw of our, human nature. But ultimately, this is where I come home to. This is my anchor, and I think that that's probably the most succinct way of explaining how I always end up coming back, even when things can, you can have questions and doubts. And I was a Christian before I was a member of the Labour Party. I was a Christian before I had deeply held political views, probably. Although I do say that the Bible is quite a political read as well. So it's hard to sometimes tease out the differences between faith and politics if you have a living faith.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing with us.
And Kat, in a day-to-day context, how does your Christian faith shape your approach to politics, would you say?
Well, I think if you speak to any politician, there are always difficult decisions to make. They might be the sort of political decisions, but also about how you support your own constituents. So whether or not it's you're in an advice surgery and you're trying to support a family in crisis, or whether or not there's a vote in Parliament, I think people without faith might take a step back and think about things. But as a Christian, you take a step back and you pray about things. And prayer is is incredibly important to me for making any life decision. So it's hard to say that as a politician, I can't imagine being a politician and not being prayerful in my approach to my politics, but also trying to. I'm very conscious that I am a politician that is known to be Christian, and that many people who don't come from a faith background or don't have faith can be quite suspicious of Christians. People perhaps look at Christians in politics and think, well, that's a bit weird, or what's their real motivation? So I'm always very conscious that as a politician of faith, and I think it's probably the same for politicians of other faiths, not just Christians, that you have to live out your faith in a way that can speak to people from a more secular background as well. So it is about being a good friend, and a good colleague, and trying to remember to be patient and kind and understanding. And like all of us, there are times it's easier than others, let's be honest. And certainly in politics, when things can get very, very heated, I'm probably quite averse to conflict, and it's just a part of who I am. But as a Christian, I think it's important that we are patient and kind and try and understand where others are coming from as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's really interesting to hear a politician talk about being averse to conflict, in that it seems so much part and parcel of what it's about. Let's shift from you then, Kat, as a person, as a human being, to the Labour Party, and particularly the history of the Labour Party. Grace at the top referenced that quote about the Labour Party
Mm.
owing more to Methodism than Marx. Talk about that a little bit. How has the Labour Party been shaped by Methodism and Christianity more generally? And to what extent is that still the case, do you think?
Very much so. So, I mean, obviously, the Labour Party was formed as a coming together of many different political strands and cultures. And Labour and Christian socialism have been linked from the very beginnings of the Labour Party, in the same way that the Fabian movement is linked to the founding of the Labour Party, or the trade union movement is linked to the founding of the Labour Party. So we have that historical tie, and throughout the history of the Labour Party, which is, a short history compared to many political parties in this country, let's be honest, we have always had that strong link with Christian socialists, those of us that believe that through our Christian faith that it calls on our politics to be socialist, to have that commitment to justice, equality, and I think that's as relevant now in 2024 as it was 100 years ago. And there have been points in the Labour Party journey that I think we've been more, and in some cases less, comfortable talking about that history and that link. But there is no doubt, when I think about either it's my local Labour Party in Lancashire or whether or not it's the National Labour Party in Westminster, that the Labour Party is run by volunteers. It is run by people who are motivated to try and bring about change. And many of those people come from a faith background. Historically, it would have been predominantly a Christian background. However, in multicultural Britain, we have people of all faiths and none who are motivated to try and bring about that sense of justice and equality. And as a Christian, my faith is is the motivator to why I want to bring about change and justice and equality in this country.
Kat, you touched upon it there, but political parties clearly have different visions for society and the different policies intended to support that vision. What is Labour's vision for society as we think about how we're going to vote in the weeks ahead?
So our leader Keir Starmer did set out in a speech in January this year at a civil society summit about the role that he sees faith communities playing in society. I don't expect many of your listeners were paying attention back in
Oh, I'm
January.
sure. I don't give them that. Goodness me, I'm sure they were on tenterhooks,
A little
Kat.
while ago now. But I think it's quite clear from what Keir has set out that we're recognising that for the past 14 years, the country has really lacked that kind of clear vision of hope for the future. We've been through some really difficult times, and Keir paid tribute to the role that faith communities have played in that. So looking back over the last few years, and I know we don't like having to think about it, but lockdowns and COVID, if it wasn't for the role of the churches and faith communities, checking on neighbours, fetching prescriptions, if it's running the food banks or the baby banks, um, churches have a huge role to play in society, and Keir acknowledged that, thanked that, and also acknowledged that because of the state the country's in right now, it's going to take more than just a government to fix society's problems. And for me, that kind of really spoke back to the kind of historic role of the church. So if you, I mean, the obvious and most visible contribution is always, I always think, is schools. So if you walk through any town, city, or village in the country, there's always St. Something's primary school that is connected to the local church, because the church has always played a role in society, be through healthcare, through education, through serving the poor. And as we've moved on society into a society that relies on the state for more of these services, the church has moved into meeting society's needs in other ways. And I think about my own church, and as soon as you walk in the door, there is the basket for donating food to the local food bank. There's often a call out for donations when we are aware of maybe a refugee family in need, for a bed or a cot, or whatever it is. And churches continue to play that role of meeting society's absolute basic needs, and we do that because that is what we're called to do as Christians. um, and that, I believe, will always have a role in society, and that, I think, that's what's come out through Keir's speech. And his real understanding, I think it's quite interesting, really, because Keir obviously doesn't come from the kind of faith background that I come from, but I have no doubt that he gets it, in the sense of that he respects the fact that we have faith. And he was really keen to bring about this role of faith champions. So there is a group of Labour politicians who have faith, and he meets with us, and will ask us questions, consult with us on things, um, and that is something that allows him to be able to connect um, into not just the Christian faith, but other faiths as well. And that network helps really connect churches, mosques, synagogues, temples in with the Labour Party, and hopefully means that a Labour government, should we be fortunate enough to have one after this general election, will have those strong networks in with these faith communities, so that they can be supported by a Labour government to do the work that they do, serving communities up and down these islands.
And so, if we were to step back from that a little bit and think about the vision for society, in a sentence, what would you say Labour's vision for society is, recognizing that civil society and faith groups in particular, in terms of what you were talking about, Kat, contribute to that vision? What is the vision?
If I had to sum it up, I'd say it would be healing the brokenness of society. There is no doubt that everything is broken at the minute. And it's something that I'm often hearing from my own constituents, whether or not it's the fight and the scramble to get a GP appointment at 8 a.m., or whether
Mm.
or not it's your child's school has got enough resources to be able to support their learning, or whether or not you're waiting for that hospital appointment, or maybe you're in the courts backlog trying to seek justice. Everything is broken, and that's something I hear. And when things are broken, we need to heal, and that's where faith communities have a role to play with a Labour government to support that healing. Because I
Yeah.
think the faith communities, that is what we do really well
Yes.
already, and that is the Labour vision, is healing those broken bits of Britain.
So, in the context then, Kat, of brokenness, fragmentation, I guess would be another description of what people feel in society just now. Um, Clearly, faith-based organisations, churches, civil society have a particular contribution. I mean, I think all of us on the call would argue a unique contribution to make in that space. What about, though, the role of government, the role of the state? What is the role, do you see, of the state? What does the Labour Party see as being the role of the state in fixing the brokenness? What is the contribution that it makes in enabling that to happen?
Well, in the most meta sense, I suppose it's the thing that brings everything together. You know, the state is a big instrument. You can have continuity and consistency across the country with the state. In a way, with individual churches, you could never get that level of consistency. But you can also have the laws that protect people. So, for instance, as a church, when we are given to the food bank, we are fighting poverty. Another way you can fight poverty is by ensuring that the minimum wage is a wage you can live off. You know, the last Labour government brought in the minimum wage, and a future Labour government is talking about strengthening that. There's a living wage that can be enough to live off, and ensuring that we have a new deal for working people in this country that protects us in the workplace and has that security, because for too long now there's been people on 0 hours contracts and fire and rehire, and all these things lead to insecurity. They can trigger poverty, and poverty just has such a huge impact on an entire family's life, whether or not it's the small child who is falling behind at school because they don't have enough space to do their homework, or they're hungry, and hungry children just can't learn. So things like the expansion of breakfast clubs, things like security in the workplace, are things that can be done by government. The government can't change this on government's own strength. It needs to be a society response as well as a government can bring it together. You can change the laws, you can bring about those protections, you can roll out things like breakfast clubs, but ultimately, if society is not working with government in the same direction, government will only ever be able to get so far.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Kat, you've spoken a bit about sort of the way that you see being a Christian in politics, and how obviously that affects the way that you want to kind of model things like kindness and patience, which all obviously, really positive attributes, and I suppose ultimately fruits of the spirit. Um, the flip side of the coin is that I'd imagine there are also some very unique challenges that come with being a Christian in politics. Um, and perhaps maybe things that are challenging specifically about being a Christian in the Labour Party. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that for many Christians in the Labour Party, it sometimes might feel that you've got to leave your faith at the door when you walk into a Labour Party meeting, in the same way that when you walk into church, you leave your party membership card at the door when you go
Mm.
into worship and enter into fellowship in the church. Now, I suppose the irony is in recent years is that my local Labour Party has started meeting in my local church, so it's literally the same. Uh, so maybe that makes it a little bit easier. I don't know, or maybe it makes it more confusing. Um, and what I would say is that if you were looking at engaging as a Christian in a political party, to bring your whole self,
Mm.
because everybody benefits and is strengthened by that. And it's the same in the church. And I don't shy about, well, it's difficult when you're the local MP because everyone knows that you've clearly got some political views, but um I can't shy away from the fact that I'm a Labour MP when I am sharing communion with my church. Everyone knows that. And yeah, to be honest, sometimes there have been moments in church where someone's approached me about a planning application as well, and I'm fine with that. You can't have half of you living your life as a politician, half of you living your life as a Christian. It has to be the whole of you in both situations.
Mm. Yeah, no, that makes I love that idea of kind of bringing your whole self, whether that's at church on a Sunday or in Parliament. I think that's definitely something that we would agree with, and part of this podcast is hearing about sort of people's whole lives and how their faith affects every part of that. Maybe we can move on to talk a bit about policies specifically, and how, I wonder, do you see the Christian story connecting with Labour policy?
I could do Grace, but I could also go back a little bit because I think
Yes, go for it. Let's rewind.
you asked a bigger question there, and I realised I wasn't consciously avoiding it. I just kind of didn't answer it, and
About challenges.
about the challenges. And
Yeah, go for it. Tell us.
yeah, I'm a Labour MP and I'm a Christian, and when I'm in Westminster, I'm a long way from my church. But there are Christian fellowship groups within Parliament, and they are cross-party and they are cross-Christian traditions, and I think that's a really powerful tool to be able to pray with MPs of from different political parties, and recognizing that actually, whilst we all have faith, we actually have come to different conclusions about which political party that we're representing. And I don't doubt that my Christian colleagues who represent other political parties, I don't think they've got it wrong or anything. I just, I mean, I disagree with their vision about how we get to that society that is more just and more equal and more fair. Um, but they are no less Christian. And I think that the
Mm.
Christian community and churches across the country would probably, um, I wish we could show actually behind the scenes sometimes that as Christian MPs, there is such strong friendships and fellowship that, and I know that come election night, there will be Christian colleagues who will lose their seats.
Mm.
And I know that there'll be other colleagues who maybe have also lost their seat or maybe they've held their seat who will be picking up the phone and talking and praying with those colleagues or presumably ex-colleagues at that point. But those friendships will outlast however long those people are MPs for, and those
Yeah.
friendships are deeper than anything as superficial as whether or not you get elected for your constituency or not.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. I suppose there's a level of unity required, isn't there? In as you say, I suppose with something like politics, it's very public, whether you agree or disagree. But actually, I love that idea that actually on a kind of more foundational level, there's a sense of, um, more than just shared interests, but shared care,
Yeah.
and as you say that we are. I think you said earlier in the episode that you were a Christian before you were a politician. And I suppose that that sort of approach of wanting to care for and meet people where they're at, whether you belong to the same party as them or not, comes through in what you shared. No, I'm glad we went back to that because that was a great addition.
And
So yeah, if you're happy.
whatever colour rosette you wear, cut on
Yeah.
election night, there is something bigger than the colour of the rosette that is in your
Mm,
soul that binds us together. So, yeah, I guess in many ways as a Christian, you go into an election knowing that God's will be. And it's really quite frustrating for some of our colleagues in the Labour Party, perhaps who don't come from a faith background, because they're thinking, oh, if we deliver an extra leaflet or if we do an extra door knocking round or if we do a really good party political broadcast, then we will win another seat. And I'm thinking, well, really, it is God's will.
yeah.
And that's probably deeply frustrating for those of my colleagues who don't share my faith.
Yeah. But it's well, we believe it's the truth, don't we?
Absolutely.
So if we think a bit about so policies, and just this connection, if there is one, between kind of the Christian story, and what you know and believe about it, and then Labour policy, and maybe you could sort of be quite specific on whether there are certain policies that you see as being kind of especially resonant with the Christian story that we know.
Um, I'm conscious that we are recording before the manifesto has come out, Grace, and
We are.
it's a little bit tricky to go into like policy detail. Uh,
Sure.
but in terms of what is being talked about ahead of manifestos,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
one of the policies that most speaks to my heart is around breakfast clubs because
Mm,
um, the Jesus that I believe walked on this earth, died on the cross for the forgiveness of my sins and all our sins, fed the poor, fed the hungry, brought the children
yeah.
forward. And for me, there is probably not a policy that speaks more to that than school breakfast clubs.
Mm, mm,
And if whether or not you're a secular person that sees this as a just a biological fact that hungry children don't learn, or whether or not you're a Christian who believes that as part of our calling, we are to take inspiration from the life of Jesus Christ and to feed the hungry and care for those that are sick, or whatever your motivation for getting there is. I think that is one of those moments where there is a common ground where for me, it's my Christian faith, but for other people, it is just a desire to help children learn that we can have a policy that I believe is strongly tied to my Christian values and probably the
yeah.
Christian values of many other Christians as well.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant example. I suppose on the flip side, and I'm aware, obviously, you're limited in what you can say at this point in time, but are there other kind of Labour policies that you would say that maybe you personally as a Christian find slightly more challenging, maybe kind of seeing? areas of conflict, or at least a bit of tension between sort of what you believe, and what the policy might be?
Um, not particularly areas of tension, but I mean, you can take a Christian approach to what you think is a priority, but there are some policy areas where it might be a little bit tricky to think what is the Christian take on this.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Like there are probably aspects of Treasury policy where it's quite far removed from the message in the Bible in terms of like trying to eradicate poverty. There might be some very dry things in there that maybe are hard to kind of look at as a Christian. Go, what is the Christian take on this? Or I'm trying to think
Sure.
of like maybe some sort of like aspects of energy policy where you're thinking, actually, is there a clear Christian take? And there isn't always going to be that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting, Kat. I can imagine that there could be some conservative politicians listening in on this, obviously wanting to get a bit of intel. I mean, maybe your opponents in your constituency, who knows? And they would be thinking, Kat, I agree with you. I'm with you. I want a society that is where everyone is able to fulfill their potential, where a society that flourishes. I want a society that is less fragmented. I want a society where there's a greater sense of unity of purpose. I want a society where there is less poverty, and where people are able to fulfill their ambitions and their dreams, etc., etc. Um, but of course, there are some significant differences between, let's just take the major political parties in terms of their prescription of how to do that, and obviously that's outlined then in the manifestos. What would you say in terms of trying to create some clear red water between you and the other political parties? What would you say is distinctive about the Labour Party offer in terms of, if we start with if you like, your prognosis that society is broken, and we want to repair it, what would you say is distinctive from a Labour Party perspective that you would say you can't see in the other parties?
So to take the Conservative Party, because obviously I'm conscious that there are many political parties contesting this general election,
Yeah.
and depending on where you live in the United Kingdom, there will be different political parties as well. Um, but for most of the sort of seats in England, the main battle will be between Labour and Conservative, and in some parts of England, the Liberal Democrats might be a contender. But the Conservative Party have been in government for 14 years, and in that time, have we got any better off? Is society less fractured or more fractured? Has there been more conflict or less conflict? And I would argue that um, whilst there are many conservative politicians who would probably agree that they want to see less poverty, the sad reality is that poverty has increased. The number of food banks has shot up massively. There are more children in poverty. And for me, that you've kind of got to look at the evidence before you that, whatever it is that they think will work clearly hasn't worked for 14 years. So do you want to try and do the same thing again and hope for a different result? Or is it time for change? Is it time for a different set of policies, i.e., the Labour Party's policies, in order to bring about that eradication of poverty, to try and heal society's broken wounds? There is no doubt in my mind that things like knife crime, delays in the justice system, that the fractured nature of society post referendums, and the way in which things like COVID disproportionately impacted the poorest members of society and the most vulnerable in our communities, says to me that it's time for change. It's time to do things a bit differently. It is time to take a Labour approach to rebuilding. And as I sort of go back to my earlier answer, that cannot just be a government bringing in policies and maybe changes in the law, or it can that on its own will never do this. It has to be Labour working with civil society, working with faith communities in order to actually transform the lives of the majority of the people in this country whose lives, frankly, have not got any better in the last 14 years. People have got poorer, wages have not kept up with prices. And sometimes I just feel like, can we let the grown-ups back in the room now? Because there has been just so much chaos. And I don't really like chaos. I don't like conflict and I don't like chaos. Maybe I'm in the wrong job, but um, I would really appreciate a period of stability
Yeah.
and calmness and sort of grown up government in order to really address the most important things. And for me, that's always going to be children. I'm very passionate about young people and children. And as Grace, you said in the introduction, I spent many years as Labour's Shadow Minister for Young People. And young people's life chances are formed so early on.
Mm.
And we are getting education in early years so badly wrong at the moment. And this has an impact on whole lives because you're only young once. I'm also incredibly passionate about the NHS, and it pains me that the waiting lists are going up and not down. It pains me that I have constituents waiting in pain for such unimaginably long lengths of time for appointments, that for so many of us, the 8 a.m. phone call to the GP surgery, and you are now number 52 in the queue. And that feeling that access to health care, which is such a basic need, really, impacts on so many people's lives.
And I guess you'd encourage us to get on the websites of the political parties, look at the manifestos, and whether it's the NHS or whether it's children more generally, look at what those policies are and the extent to which we think they will deliver the sort of outcomes that you're talking about.
Different, like beyond the party political websites, which obviously I would encourage you to go to labour.org.uk. However, there are many different political websites where you can put in the things that matter to you, and it can almost like guide you as to which political party most closely aligns with your values. But if you do that, I would say also look at where you live, look at your constituency, because because of our first past the post voting system, which to be brave, frank, and honest, I don't really agree with. I would like to see that changed. However, under the voting system we have, there is likely to be only two political parties that are likely to win where you live, and to pick the one that is most closely aligned to your politics.
So you suggesting there, Kat, I mean, this would be interesting if you are, that, people shouldn't necessarily vote Labour depending on what constituency they're in.
Oh, well, I think that a vote for Labour is always the right vote, Paul. And as a
Very
Labour
good.
politician, but I would like to see a different voting system because it pains me that I know many of my Labour friends live in constituencies where Labour has perhaps never got over 5, 6, 7% of the vote in that area. And the contest is between the Conservatives and another party. And they find themselves trying to weigh up whether or not they want to vote for what they want to vote for, i.e., the Labour Party, or whether or not they have to be quite tactical in order to stop the party they really
Yeah.
don't want to win.
Yeah.
And I know this is slightly off topic and probably uh, veering massively away from sort of the sort of Christian values in the Labour Party and stuff, but the voting system is not fair because people often feel they can't vote for what they want to vote for. And I just think it would be fairer if we had a proportional voting system where people could vote for what they wanted to vote for without the fear of letting the party they really, really don't like in. And I would like to see that. That is why I have brought private members' bills to support proportional representation.
And do you think we might see a Labour manifesto commitment on PR?
I would love to see that. The manifesto is not published yet, but I've made no secret of the fact it is something that
Mm.
I've called for.
Very good. Let's talk about leadership and character, Kat. So we've talked a bit about policy. And that actually was a theme of a previous episode of The Whole Life. In that episode, Michael Weir, who used to work in the Obama White House, argued that we can't separate the kind of politics that we have from the kind of people that we are. And he also said that the state of our politics is a reflection of our souls. What do you think about that? And to what extent do you think Keir Starmer is someone of good character? Now, I'm assuming your answer to that second question is going to be yes, he is. But I guess my comeback then to that, assuming that for a moment, would be that I guess one of the questions people have about Keir Starmer is he does seem to have U-turned on all the commitments that he made when he was running for leader, and he now seems to be in a very different place. So people might have questions about character from that perspective. So, what do you think on those two things, both on the kind of the general principle that the state of our politics is a reflection of our souls, and then also the question about Keir Starmer and his character and his therefore suitability to be prime minister?
Well, I'm deeply troubled by the idea that the state of our politics is reflective of our souls, because I don't shy away from the fact that the state of our politics is somewhat a bit of a mess right now, which doesn't therefore speak highly, I suppose, of the souls of the nation. But I'm a person that has hope and believes that we can always make things better. So I suppose I'm an optimist in that sense. But to address the comments that you've made there, Paul, about Keir Starmer, you know, when Keir, at the 2019 general election, the Labour Party went down. We went down to a dreadful defeat, and um, the idea that we would even be a contender in any subsequent general election, it felt like you were being wildly optimistic if you talked like that. And Keir's leadership has turned around the Labour Party, and I don't doubt that I know him to be a man that works very hard and is very committed to doing that. And the trouble is that in that time, a lot of things have changed. So, you know, it was early 2020 when, Keir launched his leadership campaign, and no one had heard of COVID-19. No one had heard of Partygate. There's so much that has happened. You know, Ukraine, like there is so much that has happened in the last 5 years that I don't think any of us could have imagined. And a good politician will be flexible enough to adapt, and that's not to say U-turn, but to adapt what we have to do in order to address the circumstances we find ourselves in. I have no doubt that the Labour government in 1945 felt like there was many things that they might wanted to have done, but because the country was coming out of a world war and was in a state of trauma, there was maybe many things there that they would have liked to have done that they didn't do, but they did do. They built the NHS and the welfare state as we know it today. So even in situations of national trauma and a lot of brokenness, which I'd argue in 2024, we have a very broken society as well. You have that opportunity to have a vision, and to build that, to build that NHS, to build that welfare state, to heal those wounds, to bring people together. And that's what I see in Keir Starmer and his vision-led politics, which is what he talks about. I think speaks to a leader who has seen the state of the nation and has recognised that it's through those visions and aspirations that you can build the policies and bring people together in order to get where you need to get to.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, how much has happened in 4 years. I
Mm.
remember watching the results coming through on election night last time around, and commentators were saying, well, there is no way that Labour can win the next election. So the question is, it will have to be the one after that, because the success of the Conservatives have just been so extraordinary. And for all the reasons that you've described, in part, we're kind of in such a different position politically today than probably anyone thought we would be back then. Kat, you talked a little bit earlier in our conversation about Keir Starmer being in a different space in terms of his religious or his non-religious worldview, his outlook. So he will be an openly non-religious prime minister. That's relatively unusual. And whether it's to do with that or not, I'm not suggesting these things necessarily go together, but one of the sort of more controversial things that he has said recently has been around being open to changing the laws around assisted dying, and that has caused anxiety to quite a lot of people. How do you respond to that? And in a sense, more importantly, how would you encourage us to kind of respond to that when we're thinking about who to vote for in the next election?
I think that when we're talking about assisted dying, I suppose it's a very difficult topic to talk about without bringing your own personal experiences. And I'd say that's true for politicians as it is for the voter. And we all approach it, I think, with some really deeply held views. Um, I lost a friend to motor neurone disease shortly before I was elected as an MP, so nearly 10 years ago now. And she felt powerless, and there was no hope. Um, there was no cure for motor neurone disease, and she was scared and in pain. And it's very difficult to see someone you love suffering. And if they are calling out for that release, how, with compassion, do we respond to that? Now, I'm someone who has, uh, last year I ran the London Marathon for my local hospice, and this year I'm walking 40 miles through the Lake District. Like, I believe that hospice care is amazing, and that the advances we have in pain medication is brilliant. But there are always some people for whom it's not enough and it doesn't work. And that's very hard because I, as a Christian, want to ease suffering. But I also really believe that our God given life is something really incredibly special. Now, I suppose what I'm saying is it's very hard to know where to land on this. And I don't think Keir Starmer is not thoughtful on this. I think he is very thoughtful on this. And he comes at it with the experience of his own mother and her health conditions and her pain and her suffering. Um, and for some people, maybe it's people, without faith, maybe it's people with faith. Um, they will want to end their own lives if they're suffering from a terminal illness. And there will be Christians who have different views on this. And I don't think there's a consistent view even within the Christian community on this. And there are days where I feel more sure that my instinct is to go one way or the other. Um, but I think we need to have a national conversation because I don't think we've had enough of the thoughtful conversation. And sometimes we need to have that conversation with respect for, well, we always have to have it with respect, obviously, but we need to have it in a thoughtful way where we hear people with whom we disagree profoundly, but actually try and consider where they're coming from and try and find a way forward that protects the vulnerable and eases suffering. And I don't claim to have all the answers. And it goes back to as a Christian politician, like, when do you pray? Like, I pray about this. I pray about
Mm.
whether or not we need to see a change in the law on this. And I've been in the situation in 2015. There was a private member's bill on assisted dying, and it was very obvious from the debate in the House of Commons that it wasn't going to pass its second reading, which is the first stage in the parliamentary process. Um, and if it had passed, it would have gone into committee. There would have been amendment. It had a very long journey to go, basically, and it was obvious it wasn't going to get past the first hurdle. And I voted in that division, and I didn't know how I was going to vote until the division bell went. And then I felt a really strong calling that I should vote for it, even though I knew it was not going to pass, because I actually thought it would be so helpful for a nation to have a conversation about this. Because there are people that have strongly held views on both sides. And I would like to see us having a national conversation about where we find common ground and where we can all be content.
Kat, one last question. Give us your pitch. We've got an opportunity to vote.
Way.
It is, but you're a politician. You can do this. So, give us your pitch for why we should vote Labour on polling day. Maybe 1 minute.
In 1 minute. Okay,
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah.
Right. Okay. I suppose After 14 years of the Tories breaking our society and seeing increases in poverty, it's time for change. And that Labour, through its missions, will have the vision to bring about that healing, to make sure that our NHS is safe and secure for future generations, to ensure that those future generations have a positive experience in education and in learning, and that we all have something, a stake in this society, and that together that we can all push for that eradication of poverty, for equality, for justice, and for a better Britain that is no longer broken. And just to get that future back where we can be optimistic and hopeful, and we know we can build a better society. And that is with government, together with civil society, and with faith organisations and churches, to make sure that it reaches every single corner of Britain.
Kat, thank you so much. I didn't have my stopwatch out, Grace. I
I
don't know
think I
if you
was
did,
just
but
under. So
that
well
that
done.
seemed good. I think you did it. Thank you so much.
After all.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Kat, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for giving up your time. And yeah, we hope that the next few months, well, we'll know much more, won't we? Whenever this ends up being released, we wish you all the best in the election campaign, however that may look. But yeah, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chris.
Kat. Really good to meet you.
So cool. How did you find our conversation with Kat today?
Well, really interesting. What an approachable and personable person. I don't know Kat, and it was really nice to meet her and talk with her. She was much more confessional in a way than I had expected in terms of the way that she talked about her own Christian faith and
Mm,
the significance that that has for her and the way that that plays out in her everyday. And liked the way that she talked about the fact that she has to bring her whole person, whether that's into
yeah.
the world of politics or whether it's in her local church. She remains the same person. So that was all really interesting. I thought there were three things that sort of just triggered me. I thought the conversation around God's will was interesting because I think one of the things I would sort of say back to that is, well, God's will isn't always done, and that's why we pray that it should be.
Yeah.
So what happens and how do we respond to God's will not being done? By that I mean what God would want to be
Mhm.
done, and of course that's part of, I guess, the motivation in terms of working for a better sort of society. In part is all in order that we might see it reflect more of the sort of society that God wants and the sort of society in which human beings can flourish. So that was interesting. And then I think the two other things that I was kind of particularly struck by, one was around the assisted dying conversation at the end. I mean, I think
Mm,
she rightly helpfully drew attention to the fact that that is, it's a very difficult and it's a sensitive
mm,
conversation. I think I would just be so concerned about the potential impact of any assisted dying laws on the most vulnerable in society. And I think
yeah.
there is evidence in Canada and elsewhere at the moment throughout the world of how dangerous that could be. So that'd be an area of concern for me. But I thought she rightly drew attention to, if you like, how personally freighted that is, and how often we respond to issues like that on the basis of our own personal
Mm,
experience. And I thought the kind of the vision question was interesting in terms of, what is the vision of the Labour Party and what are the policies that will deliver it, and the extent to
mm,
which that is a vision that includes not only government having a role, but in a sense, government providing the infrastructure to some extent for then civil society, and for, I guess, we could talk also about the market having a role to play then in bringing that sort
mhm.
of society about. So there were some really interesting themes there. And I think I'll be having a good read of the Labour Party manifesto.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. I think I was struck by just what a lovely temperament she had actually. And I think when she was speaking about, this idea of wanting to live out her faith and as you say, Paul, bring her whole self to whatever environment or whatever room she's in. And she spoke about this idea of wanting to display patience and kindness. And I was just thinking, I can't imagine you being anything other than that, Kat, because she was such a lovely person. But I think, yeah, two things, one of which you touched on already that struck me, one of which was just how she spoke so openly about prayer, actually, and how um she sort of said that where some politicians might think about how to act, she will pray on how to act. And I think, as you say, she was clearly very, very open about the influence that her faith and also her prayer life has on um the way that she is and the way that she acts as a politician. And I suppose she brought that in as well, didn't she, too? Because I agree, I thought she um handled well, actually, the question about assisted dying. But I appreciate and I agree that there's so much nuance that I was quite surprised with how open she was about her own, well, firstly, as you say, first-hand experience, but also just I'm sure we could all pick up kind of um you know, snippets of what her view, or well, she said, didn't she, how she voted on
Yeah.
the issue a few years ago. But I also like that, what she said in terms of actually that's also an area where that she prays into, because I think few of us would say that that's an easy topic to have some level of influence on as a politician. So yeah, I think she brought that sense of these are the issues that face in society, and this is how I, as in her, she thoughtfully responds to them as a Christian. So yeah, I'm intrigued to hear what the other conversations hold for us as we interview people from other parties, really.
Yeah, great start, I thought.
Indeed. Well, on that note, thank you so much for listening to this election special episode of The Whole Life. Do let us know what you think in the comments and tell your friends about it. But until next time, from me, Grace, and my co host, Paul, that was The Whole Life. Goodbye. And yeah, we hope you will join us again soon.
Goodbye.